And when we look at the Board of Trade, or when we look at the New York Stock Exchange or other exchanges, right, we don't see rules 1007. We don't see rules 350.05H on MCCs. We don't see 107.202. We don't see 425.02, right? Prescribing after-hour tradings, creating the 1-minute extension, allowing for MCC trading, regulating the hedging rules. We see the free market at work. How did that come about? Well, the first answer is, well, maybe it's true. Maybe the regulation of the Parisian markets were somehow qualitatively different than the regulations of the Chicago Board of Trade. I'll spare the details. I've spent a couple of years looking into the archival records of the Parisian markets and the policing of the Parisian markets, just to say that actually that's not right. There was an extensive web of regulation in the Parisian markets, but it was actually, it turns out to have been an administrative kind of civil mesh that was relatively petty. We in the criminal law domain like to try and make a lot of this lieutenant de police. But the fact is that he was a kind of secondary figure in the administrative and policing processes in Paris. The rules were kind of codified by Delamarre and Fréminville, but they were very poorly enforced, and they often led to minimal fines, something that today we would think of as kind of, there were too many of them, they weren't being enforced. If you actually look at the ledger of the lieutenant de police and the commissaire, it's fascinating to see. But the phenomenon that they identified most was the fact that people weren't sweeping in front of their stores. And so it's a little bit like, I don't know if you've seen the diary of Louis XVI around the time of July 1789. But it's a fascinating diary. Every day he would have an entry. Most of the days would say rien, means nothing. July 14th says rien on July 14th. It was a little bit like that. You go through the policing commission, the archives of the policing commission, and it's basically numéro 4, rue Vieux Temple, non balayé, means not swept, right? They had a code. It was non-bal. Non-bal. You know, the next day they would go around, find places non balayé, you know, a little bit of sewer problems, construction material that's impeding the sewer drainage. It was mostly in times of scarcity that the police des grains would then intervene and try and impose amende to try and make sure that people were at their stores, at the market, selling product. It was, in some sense, kind of this response to the need to do something in the case of scarcity. And in contrast, of course, we all know the minute regulations of, say, the Chicago Board of Trade. Not only are they minute, but at the same time, they're also fixing prices, right? I mean, when the MCC comes in, they've got a fixed price to close transactions. It's 532 to 534. Right? The answer, then, is not that this is simply correct. The answer, I believe, is that it turns on the emergence in the 18th century of the idea of natural order, a seductive idea. The idea of natural orderliness, of an economic system that is autonomous and can achieve equilibrium without governmental intervention. And the eventual metamorphosis of this notion of natural orderliness from the 18th century into, in the 20th century, the notion of natural market efficiency. It's the idea of natural order that makes coherent and renders possible the belief in self-adjusting and self-sustaining markets, that flows and that allows us to reimagine social reality. And it's this idea of natural order that made possible the shift in semiotic meaning of the police des grains, from a policy viewed as necessary and freedom-enhancing at the time, by Delamarre, for instance, right, to a policy viewed as oppressive and misguided today. Now, the conclusion that I've come to in my research is that it's these beliefs that have kind of given fruition to the notion of market efficiency, and therefore that our ideas today are the product in part of this seductive idea from the 18th century. Now, first, and a couple of things. First, this idea of natural efficiency. I argue that it traces back to the early French economists, François Quesnay, the Marquis de Mirabeau, Dupont de Nemours, Mercier de la Rivière, and their writings in the period 1758 to 1767. Now, François Quesnay presented this idea of natural order in his famous Tableau économique, which was first published in 1760 in Mirabeau's L'Ami des Hommes. This was a graphic depiction of cash flows, right? Perhaps you're all familiar with it, between the three categories in society, between the producers, the owners of property, and merchants and commerce. And what was so remarkable about this zigzag in the flow was that it was an entirely autonomous system, right? Not only a system, I mean, some systems require external impetus, right? Some systems, an engine requires fuel. This system was entirely autonomous, and all of the net product that was created here was created through the internal flows going between these three classes. Now, it's this same notion that resurfaces later in the work of Adam Smith and Jeremy Bentham, and today in the work of contemporary neoliberal thinkers, such as Richard Posner, who will be joining us today, or Richard Epstein. It's this idea that has metamorphosed into the notion of the efficiency of markets. Now, the question, of course, is at what price? And what I try to suggest in my work is that what it has brought with it is what I call neoliberal penalty. And by neoliberal penalty, I have in mind a form of rationality in which the penal sphere, punishment, is pushed outside political economy and serves the function of a barrier or border. The penal sanction is marked off from the dominant logic of neoclassical economics as the only space where order is enforced by the government. The bulk of economic exchange at the heart of society is viewed as orderly, voluntary, and compensated. The penal sphere is the outer bound, where the government can interfere, there and there alone. Now, this discourse of neoliberal penalty, I suggest, was born in the 18th century. It was nurtured in the 19th century, and it came to full fruition at the end of the 20th century. And it has facilitated the growth of the penal sphere. It makes it easier to resist government intervention in the marketplace and to embrace criminalizing any and all deviance outside. It facilitates passing new criminal statutes and wielding the penal sanction more liberally, because that is where administration is necessary, right? That is where the state can legitimately act. That is the proper sphere for governing. I see it reflected